when everything is personalized, nothing is personalized. If an AI can read your LinkedIn profile, can read your 10Ks, can read your press releases, whatever, and personalize, and then every single email that you as a buyer, potential buyer, receive all looks kind of the same. Delete, 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 right? And then what?
Welcome to the Sales Consultant Podcast. My name is Derek Williams, and I'm your host. I'm happy to introduce the very first episode of our second season, and our special guest kicking things off is with the esteemed Jeremey Donovan. Jeremy spent 17 years at Gartner at the start of his career. He also spent 4 years at SalesLoft as a Senior Vice President of Revenue Strategy. He's the author of 5 books, including the international public speaking bestseller, How to Deliver a TED Talk, as well as Predictable Prospecting. Today, he's the EVP of RevOps and Strategy at Insight Partners, a global venture capital and private equity firm that invests in high growth technology, software, and internet businesses. I hope you enjoy the conversation as we navigate through the dynamic intersection of technology and sales strategies. At the start of your career, you were very focused on the technical realm. You led research analyst teams and have evolved into a go-to-market revenue guru, if you will, right? You spend time in product management, product marketing, and you're heading up sales strategies today. Talk to us about the evolution from that technical focus to GTM. Is it playing well for you, that technical aptitude in your advisory capacity? Why not stay focused on technical areas? How did you make that leap, if you will?
Yeah, I've always considered technical aptitude to kind of be a secret superpower.
Hmm.
And I mean, without going through the whole, I'll start you at 10 years old, but then I'll jump 40 years from there. So at 10, I realized, or I thought, I guess, I wanted to become an engineer, and I did pursue that and started my career off that way as a semiconductor engineer. But one of the things I realized, it was semiconductor engineering and computer science. One of the things I realized, this is talk much about this, but I thought about becoming a full-time programmer back then.
Hmm.
And the reason I didn't do it was because I dream when I'm coding a lot, I dream in code, and that they're really kind of nightmares in a way. They're very stressful, non-fulfilling sleep. So I decided
I
I
can't even
would not.
imagine.
I couldn't do it for a living, but I do. Like, I'm 50 now, so I said I'd jump 40 years from there, and to this day I still code, and I've kept
Hmm.
up. It started out with basic back when I was, little, and then we progressed through tons of languages, and now I kind of view everything as like it doesn't really matter. You can flip between languages. I do more JavaScript and um, Python these days, but it's you sort of jump between those things. But I think the interesting question is, for a salesperson and or for a RevOps person, and they're probably very different roles. Does that kind of technical aptitude matter, right? Like, I've pursued not just the computer science, but statistics and just other things to keep my brain sharp in the math and computer science areas. For RevOps, I can unequivocally say that absolutely it's a superpower, right? Like, I'm able to process and crunch data, I think, a lot faster than on average, which means I can get, using code, which means I can get answers to complex questions, right? That may not be even really possible to do in a spreadsheet. So, like, here's an example of my current work where I was actually coding just 2 days ago. We have 500 plus portfolio companies, and we have tons of data from them every quarter. But that data it's structured, but we don't necessarily crunch all kinds of statistics off of it. Like, what's your sales and marketing efficiency? What's your customer acquisition cost, uh, payback period? Like, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
So to go into Excel and like generate a report using that
Pivot
data
table
with
or
all these
something.
metrics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, what I did was I wrote some code that basically takes all that data, calculates all those ratios, does charts on every statistic to trend that over time, and then pushes that into PowerPoint and then converts that into PDF, right? So I can press a button, and I wish I could say it was like 2 seconds later. For 500 companies, it takes a while. Like, a few hours later, you get 500 PowerPoints with all the trend data for every company. And then
Wow.
I could simple to add code that would then automatically send that to the CEOs and CROs of our portfolio companies. So, like, that's the kind of thing where, I mean, the coding is not that complicated, but to have that skill allows you to be able to, delight your coworkers, delight your customers, in our case, delight our portfolio company leaders, all that much more. So yeah, that's always been a secret superpower. So I think in RevOps more generally, like I think being able to do stuff like that is really, really helpful. In sales, I don't know. Like I thought it'd be really interesting if someone were to come along and do kind of programming for salespeople. And
Wow.
even though they wouldn't necessarily use it, I think it's, I don't, I mean,
Well, if
I
they're
think it's
selling
interesting.
something that is in that realm, I think there's definitely a given there that there should be some aptitude towards, programming. If you are working for, say, an API company or a
Yeah,
software development company, you should probably understand some of those core concepts. You may not roll your sleeves up and do the coding yourself, but there's an innate or intimate understanding there that would probably apply. But in terms of just being able to be more effective in your outreach, in your servicing of clients, yeah, I mean, it's probably not as relevant in my mind, but I've seen some very technical reps that put together their own screen scraping and so these more technical shortcuts, if you will, that the average salesperson isn't taking advantage of because they just don't have that skill set. So,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think it's in sales management too. I think even more importantly, or adjacent to sales ops or rev ops, I should say, is sales management. Is all the tools and the tech stacks that we're using. If the leader of that team isn't familiar with how this stuff works, maybe not going to the degree you're talking about where you're building in automation and creating your own lines of code, but there is a technical aptitude that
yeah.
I think is paramount.
On sales management for sure, right? I mean, you need to know how to use your BI tools. You need to know how to create
Right.
reports, whether that's in Salesforce or in whatever, whatever you're using, Looker, Power BI, what have you, Tableau. Well, Tableau is super complicated, but people do love Tableau. So to be able to put stuff in there, I think does matter. And to your point about APIs, I remember listening to a podcast the last month or two, which was one of the first podcasts with the head of sales at OpenAI, and she was
Hmm.
mentioning that when she got hired into her role, and I don't know if they still do it, but they were basically requiring everybody who got a job there to like call the ChatGPT AI, sorry, AI via API. There's a lot of words in there, but
Yeah,
a lot of
I get
acronyms
it.
there. But basically use the API in Python to like do something, and it wasn't. It's not meant to be super complicated, but it gives you an empathy, right, for the
Absolutely.
user and the product, and to be able to also. I mean, so much of sales is storytelling. So for her to and her team to be able to go in and basically have that empathy when they talk to developers and say, like, yes, I have called a REST API, right, using Python. People don't expect that. I think it gives
I've
you
initiated that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it gives you credit. It gives you a certain credibility
Yeah, I think there
for
should
sure.
good. Well, it's obviously played through in your career, and appreciate the time traveling there. That was helpful. And for those that don't know, Jeremy, his background, let's see, just real quick: Cornell University, BS and MS in electrical engineering, University of Virginia, master's degree in data science, and from the University of Chicago, both schools of business, an MBA in economics and statistics. So quite the resume there in terms of
Perpetual student. Yeah, the data science degree was recent. There really wasn't, right? Those sort of things didn't exist. I had a little extra time during COVID, as
mm,
some of us did. So I did a degree in part time. That's a whole other conversation about the evolution of the education system over time, less relevant to sales strategy. AI and machine learning was really what the degree was about. So it was kind of on the technical side. So I did that before I'd ever, well, most people had ever heard of ChatGPT, and we
right.
were using the uh, the T in GPT is a transformer, and Google, really did a lot of the innovative work on transformers early on, and there was a publicly accessible model called BERT, BERT, with again that T is for transformer. So we were actually in the classes using, the early versions of this stuff to do generative AI, and the course also was it was a little bit of the like text-based stuff. It was
Okay.
much more heavily focused on the more sort of traditional machine learning models for like prediction. I actually think there's more value. I mean, it's complicated. In sales right now, I personally find more value in the predictive AI applications than I necessarily do in the generative AI applications. But yes,
Interesting.
Gen AI is definitely catching up, and it's like amazing to watch from month to month, right? What happens? I was, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, I was like, this is kind of a toy. And then ChatGPT4 and enhancements to ChatGPT4 came out, and then Google changed the Bard interface over to Gemini in early
Mm.
December. And with those two changes, like, wow, it's 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 really dramatically improved. Like I'm finding it an essential tool in particular I can think of two use cases. One is in general, my usual search process, because I think I heard this term the other day, an infovore. Like I love to consume information, but let's say
Aware, yeah.
I'm searching for something, and what I would normally do, right, is Google and pull up 10 pages, and then sort of synthesize across those pages by reading and taking notes and finding similarities and what have you. But that's exactly what these things do, right? So once
Mm.
ChatGPT and Bard opened up and started looking at the internet, like it's doing that work for you. So now I trust it to basically do that stuff. So that's one use case I use all the time. And then the other one, I had not used it much for writing because it's not. I do write, but I don't know. I was kind of snobby about writing from scratch, but I had to write a blog post recently, and I had content. I had a presentation basically,
Yep.
and I had an outline. So I basically just fed the outline of the
You
article I
prompted
wanted
it
to write,
with, uh
and I gave it the PDF, and I said write 1,000 word blog post, and it was maybe I changed 5 words. It was awesome. So yeah, that's good and bad, right? Is the ability to create content so easily um, is a good and a bad, right?
Is it
Like
good and a bad? It's the arms race at this
yes,
point, right? You had a post recently that this is a great segue, uh, and I'll kind of paraphrase the post a little bit. You can reframe it for me, but it starts out calling attention to the fact that AI is nearing perfect personalization, what that means, and it will enable salespeople and to outreach at scale using AI and personalization, which could be good. But then there's some counterpoints to that as well in terms of how our prospects will receive that. And then, there's this waterfall effect of, well, if we're going to get perfect about personalization, then the buyer is going to adjust their expectations, probably start ignoring a lot of stuff. So reframe this for me. I think it's a good
yeah,
segue away from the AI piece that you're saying to how does this affect your everyday salesperson and what you predict in 2024?
yeah. I mean, I think you said it perfectly. So, right, take our own portfolio companies. They're asking us, and we're advising them on how to leverage AI to become more productive, right? I mean, the mantra has gone in the, I think, business world in general, but certainly in VC and PE world from no one ever said growth at all costs, but I think they probably said aggressive growth. And now we all say, efficient growth, right?
Efficient growth,
So
healthy growth,
yes,
yes. Hmm.
yeah. AI is potentially one of those things that helps you gain efficiency. And I just kind of on those walks when I'm not listening to podcasts, I'm thinking, and while I'm thinking, I'm sort of thinking, okay, we got to play the multi-step chess on this stuff, like winding the clock back, right? Early personalization that was super effective was putting someone's first name in the subject line of an email. Super effective.
It was.
And I think it was effective because it was novel, and it was effective because there wasn't the available tools didn't do that, right? Like you had to physically type that person's that person's first name into the subject line of the email. And what that triggers is like all those things, right? Of persuasion and influence, which is it's novelty, and it's also reciprocity, right? That person took time to think about you as a human and type your name in there. And like it worked. Ditto with so many other things. And then once dynamic tags, right, came about and you could just drop this stuff in, then every email we got had the first name in there, and then it just stopped working, so people stopped doing that. There's countless examples of that. So how this ties to AI, right, is there's this concept in AI of the uncanny valley where you can't tell whether it's a human did it or an AI did it. And
Hmm.
I actually don't think this uncanny valley matters in the personal in response to personalization. So my concern is when everything is personalized, nothing is personalized, I guess,
Right.
right? And
Hmm.
and the response rates actually they have been in a long-term decline. And I imagine that true cold email response rates these days, well, I know it's less than 2% for sure at scale when you talk about tens of millions of emails, hundreds of millions, if not billions of emails being sent by B2B, salespeople. I would not at all be surprised if the truth was sub 1%. You'll read a LinkedIn post every once in a while where someone will say, I got X ridiculous response rate to a cold email, and I call BS on that. Like,
The
you know,
70% open rates, 60% open rate response rates, I should say.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Open rate is total BS because
Yeah,
the spam checkers like open the email, they follow links, like none of that stuff matters, but it's positive response rate. Positive response rates are probably well below 1%. So getting back to this, which is if an AI can read your LinkedIn profile, can read your 10Ks, can read your press releases, whatever, and personalize, and then every single email that you as a buyer, potential buyer, receive all looks kind of the same, delete, 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 right? And then what? That to me is the interesting question, right? Then what? So it's I don't think this is rocket science, right? I mean, the same thing that has worked for probably since the beginning of human civilization is referrals, right? If someone else is using something and getting value out of it, and I know that person and trust that person, then I'm like, I'm more likely to use it. And the more close the connection is, the
it's
better.
the highest conversion rate is an introduction. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, right. Right. This gets at word of mouth becomes it becomes even more valuable. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think
It
that's
goes
kind of,
back to the efficient growth piece of like really taking care of that embedded base and making sure
yeah.
that they're reaching their intended goals with your solution and getting to a point where they want to sing your praises and
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
and refer you out. On that
Build
post, you
evangelists.
made a good point though as well, is that this outbound channel of phone, email, social, we're going to get 99.99% perfect in personalization. They're going to start ignoring it because everything will be personalized. So that pushes us down into the other channels to
Yes.
invest our efforts, right? Content is inbound, PLG, these sorts of things. But then again, it's like, then what? Because
Right.
AI catches it. So I think it leads back to when you do acquire customers and you do have those first discovery calls all the way through to customer success, that we're very customer centric in this approach and helping them reach their goals. Because if we're not picking good customers and they're not renewing, reaching their goals, referring, then it doesn't matter how
Yeah, you're out of luck.
personalized we are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're out of luck. And to that point about channels, right, is we're seeing it right now that we have not every portfolio company, but many, many, many of them are redirecting budget from outbound into those other channels, in particular inbound, PLG if applicable, and then the partner channel as well. Because a partner is right. That partner has a relationship. They're already selling into the
Goes
customer,
back
and
to
they
the
say
introductions.
it's the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing. It gets
It's
tricky.
funny.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it gets tricky with like the review sites. I do still trust review sites like a G2 or something like that. And my rationale is every vendor in the review site can game equally. So if they're gaming equally, then whoever, but it's still like here's the gaming, right? Which is you reach out to your high net promoter score customers and you offer them whatever a 25 or $50 gift card to write a review for you on those sites. But look, if you can, they're still that still takes some amount of effort on the part of these people, right? So I do think there's some value to it, and I'm still going to shortlist based on like a G2 or similar review site. So I think that's another, right? Like that's another valuable use of marketing.
I want to switch to a sales enablement topic for a quick second. So, sales enablement as a function has gained a lot of popularity, has been adopted, I think, at a higher rate in the last couple of years than ever before. We've seen the evolution of sales training going more broad and encompassing to sales enablement. Do you think we're at a point now, because I think you would agree that however good our strategy is, however good our tactics and our playbooks and these things are, it all comes back down to, and even how technical we are, still comes back down to people in these organizations executing to the best of their abilities. So do you find as a strategy person that sales enablement folks should be more involved in those earlier strategy conversations and setting the direction of the business? Or where do you see them playing a role? Because I'm seeing more VPs of sales enablement
Yeah.
and these sorts of roles popping up. So again, totally switching gears on you
Yeah,
here a
for
little
sure,
bit,
for
but
sure.
is sales enablement a big focal area, do you think, as a function and from an execution standpoint
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
coming year?
Oh, so many thoughts. One is yeah. I mean, I've worked with some VP, ex-VP level sales enablement people. One that comes to mind is Sean Fowler, who was very much my partner in crime at SalesLoft, and he and I were peers. We both reported to the CRO, and we collaborated incredibly closely, like lockstep, his organization and my organization and us personally. And I saw the value, right, that a super strategic sales enablement person can bring. So yeah, I definitely see the value there. I think it's a couple thoughts. So one is I remember working for a different CRO one time who basically said we were talking about sales enablement, and he pointed out amongst his peer group that there are some CROs and CEOs who believe in enablement and some who don't. Like,
Right, philosophically, yeah,
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 philosophically. And if you philosophically believe in it, then you're going to invest in it. And then the question is, what's the right ratio? So whenever, when I was kind of more actively operating, I would always have agreements with the CFO. And I basically said, look, I don't want to negotiate with you to hire incrementally all the time. Let's just build everything off of ratios, like prospectively based on where we think we are going to be at headcount in the next 6 months, right? So, we would negotiate a ratio for RevOps people. We would negotiate a revenue for enablement people. And part of the reason for that, and this gets at the value pieces, is like, what's the return on sales enablement? What's the return on RevOps? It's so hard to quantify, and it is considered to be a support function, right? They don't have quota,
indirectly. Hmm.
and I get asked all the time by the CEOs and CROs of the portfolio companies I support, how should I measure return on enablement, and or how should I compensate the enablement and or RevOps people? And my answer is, please use a ratio. You will pretty much never be able to measure the return on enablement. I'm sure there are people who would differ with me. I mean, are there metrics? Sure. Can you measure sales productivity? Sure. But are you going to actually be able to do an A/B test where you kind of enable some people and not others with a
Right. Like, how do you
significant,
know it was the sales enablement, path? It wasn't the sales management. It wasn't individual changes. Like, how do you attribute that
right?
back? So is that what you mean by
Yeah,
ratio?
yeah,
Mm,
yeah, right. And the ratio is like how many enablement people per quota carrying seller,
okay.
right? And just lock that ratio in and go, and don't worry about trying to measure the unmeasurable, because it's just not possible to do the attribution. And then from a compensation point of view, what I say is, look, just tie the sales enablement people, give them a base bonus split, whatever that is, and tie that bonus to the exact same target that the CRO has, right? So if the CRO
Hmm.
has a,
Hmm. Hmm.
increase net ARR by net new ARR by X dollars, then just let the enablement people and the RevOps people have that. I don't, in my experience, RevOps people and sales enablement people or revenue enablement people they're like passionate, dedicated, hardworking
Absolutely.
humans. And I don't actually think that they are particularly they're not coin operated, right? Like they're gonna bust their butts no matter what, because they have a passion for the job. And I think you're rewarding, they can share in the company's success, but I think they're going to work just as hard whether you gave them 100% base or whether you had a base bonus
That's
split.
interesting.
I don't think they're going to change their work.
Unlike a salesperson, where I think there's a lot of research and debate on, should we incentivize through variable compensation? Should we go all base? And there's been age-old debate there on that. But with someone in
Yeah.
RevOps and a sales enablement function, it could go either way, just because of it's passion, it's the work that they like to do.
Yeah. And with reps, yeah, I think most of the time I've seen, it's very rare to see 100% base kind of for sales. And even when I've seen it, what it really tends to be is like a lagging moving average. So for example, like if you close 400 to $600,000 of a business,
Hmm.
maybe you have 100K OTE. If you close 800 to 1.2 million, maybe you have a 200K OTE. And there I'm just using like a 5x ratio in there. And as long as you close that in the last year, you kind of move between bands. A lot of times that's what's really going on, is it's just a moving average, which by the way is fine. Like it gives some safety to the reps. As I understand it, I don't know if things have changed, but like if you were trying to qualify for a mortgage, they would only do that off of your base. So that would help salespeople, be able to, buy a home.
Do
So
things in life, right? Yeah,
yeah, but it's pretty rare. And it also tends to be in in areas where like maybe some company has a huge amount of inbound demand.
right.
So it's a lot more transactional. I don't think you tend to find that in,
In
you
those
know,
cases, I definitely see a less aggressive split. You're not seeing
yeah,
the 50-50 splits in terms of base and variable. I think to your point, you start seeing the 70s and the 70-30s and these sorts of things,
yeah,
75-25 kind of splits where variable compensation doesn't make up the vast majority because yeah, we're well structured, we're well
yeah,
defined, we have great inbound, right? We have a partner program that's feeding you as well. But if it's look, feast or famine type of situation. We need new business.
yeah.
We're gonna go aggressive on some of that.
I did want
It,
to go back and tie AI and enablement
okay,
together, by the way. So I was watching
perfect.
a replay of Mark Roberge at the last SaaStr. I didn't attend, but I watched the replays, and he was talking about AI, and he was challenging, himself and the audience to think about areas where, AI, where there were really new areas of opportunity for new companies, because his
Mm,
point was the existing companies who already have great data moats are going to lead on the integration of AI into those features. So it's really hard for companies to gain a foothold. So like take where I came from in sales engagement, different than enablement, right? You've got three-ish companies, 3 companies who are the dominant companies in the space, tons of customers, tons of data. Like they're probably going to win on the application of AI into that world, probably. He was saying like, what is an area where there actually isn't a ton of data, and sales enablement is actually one of those areas. And
interesting.
the rationale is you could argue that the conversation intelligence people have a ton of data, right? They have all these call recordings, but what they have is they have recordings of reps talking to prospects and customers. What they don't have is they don't have data on reps being coached by their managers. And yeah, there's a little bit, right? I don't think people do enough of listening to calls and putting comments about the calls, just
Agreed.
timestamp comments.
Agreed.
They just
100%.
massively underutilize that.
Hmm.
Uh, but but yeah, so like I think there's an opportunity that if those kind of coaching moments can
Platforms.
be,
Yeah, I mean, it comes to mind the Coach CRM. I know is as a cool little platform that they have for putting those coaching plans together,
yeah,
incorporating CRM data and different things. But to your point, how do you aggregate and use AI to pick up on anomalies, identify the trends, and
yeah,
then maybe even recommend coaching plans in
yeah,
a jiffy, right?
yeah.
Without
And
having to do a lot of that manual work. I mean, you could blend conversational intelligence into those models, probably.
yeah, yeah. I ran across one company where it'll listen to your call, right? And it's sort of an enhancement to the conversation intelligence folks because they're already giving you summaries. They're already telling you what your percentage talk time and your number of questions, right? All this
Yeah,
analytics, which
yeah,
is quite useful. This company tries to take it one step further and actually give you coaching points. When I was talking to the founder of this company and I was asking a little bit under the covers of it, and right now it's just, let's say you and I are having a conversation, it's going to give me some feedback based on, my what I've said.
right.
What it does not yet have, or none of these systems yet have, but I think imminently could have, is it doesn't know me longitudinally. It doesn't know me across time, right? It's not, when it's coaching me on this call, it's not looking
Okay,
back at the 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 other calls I've done and watched that evolution. It also doesn't know necessarily the sales methodology of your company. It doesn't know your product. It's still going to do like, the model. Yeah, the models will get better and better, but you kind of need a local model, right? You almost need this local model that is trained off of my company's calls and my calls. It needs to know what are good calls and bad calls, and that requires some effort, right? So that we're not there yet, but that's another one that I'm fascinated about on the AI part. In the interim, my closing thought well, you can continue, but like my closing thought on this is, I, I I personally try to encourage sales managers to dedicate to time block and like review whatever it is, some number of, one call per rep per week, and go in there and actually listen to it and put the comments. Part of my rationale is, and I did a poll on this on LinkedIn, but I can't remember what the results exactly were, but it was like tying this back to the beginning. If you are my manager and you listen to my call and you put comments in, I think I'm far more likely to take action than if an AI did that, because this person in a position of authority to me took the time to give me feedback. I think I'm more likely to listen and take action. I don't statistically know the answer to that, but I based on I read a lot of academic research, and like based on everything I've studied and read, that feels very, very logical to me.
Well, I appreciate that. As a fractional manager myself, it's one of the big focal points of what I do with SDR teams is exactly that, where executives don't have the time, the bandwidth, or even maybe the skill set in some cases to really diagnose these calls patterns and how we're opening the call, how we're asking for the meeting, how we're navigating objections and rebuttals. Are we consistent with our messaging and explaining the product accurately? Yeah, I think AI, it sounds like we'll get to a point where we can ingest a model that has not only our internal specifics and methodology, my work body of work over time, but also industry best practices, taking in inputs like from predictable prospecting and the challenger sale and these things, and being able to coach from a larger external model as well. Because that's, I think, what we're doing as external consultants a lot of times is we're taking in synthesized experiences and research, and we're trying to tailor it to the unique specifications of that environment, that company at that time, and that
Yeah.
user. And so, mind shifting here on the show, ladies and gentlemen, AI has an opportunity in the sales enablement space. Thank you for that, Jeremy. I'm
Yeah,
going to take you through
all
some.
credit to Mark Roberge on that, by the way. So yeah, I'm
Another
stealing.
person I would love to interview one day, if at all possible. Anyway, so rapid fire for you. I'm gonna let you continue about your day. Just in closing here. So who do you follow on LinkedIn? Who do you get your cues from? I follow you. When you post, I read it word for word. Who is that person for you? Is it Mark Roberge? Is this someone else? Is there a certain
Yeah,
research firm? Mhm.
I follow a lot of people. I would say the ones I respect people with a a, a a quirky point of view and a unique point of view. So the two that I really like right now, Jason Lemkin, just day after day after day, I think he produces really insightful stuff. From a company point of view, I love to follow Gong. That I think they had fallen off the wagon a little bit.
They
It was
did,
great,
yeah.
great
Mhm.
under Chris Orlov, great under Devin Reed. The two of them left. There was a gap, and then now I think they've upped the game again. So I'm starting to see good stuff come out of them again. And the last one that I found recently, guy has a huge following, but I hadn't discovered him recently, was a guy named Chris Walker, who does Revenue Vitals podcast and
Mhm.
posts on LinkedIn. I think he has a really fresh point of view. He's more marketing centric, but it does bleed
Yeah,
over
you
into
actually
sales.
reposted something from him recently that was talking about, I think, cold outreach. But yeah,
Yeah.
another person yeah, very marketing centric, at least in the years past. But
Yeah, still, but
yeah,
good follow.
yeah. Good. Thank you. What's a book you've read recently? And, is it something that every revenue leader should read? Obviously, we've talked about predictable prospecting. You have four of the books you've authored. But, is there something you've read recently that's really key for a revenue leader to maybe study?
Yeah, I read, by the way, I read a ton. It's a whole other line of conversation. I'm in countless books a year. I was actually thinking about a New Year's resolution to not read any new books.
Okay.
But
Just
anyway,
reread the
yeah,
old ones. It's
just
still,
reread the old
yeah,
ones. Yeah,
yeah.
just reread. Because I read literary fiction, sci-fi, business books, nonfiction that's not business, the gamut. But in sales, I read recently Selling With by Nate Nasrella.
Hmm.
That's the latest sales book I just finished, and I thought that was outstanding. It's kind of expanding upon the champion part of Medic. So I think that's a good read. And then other books I've read in the last sales books I've read in the last, like year or two that I thought were new and outstanding. I would put the Jolt Effect, like
Yep,
really,
yep,
really
absolutely.
high
The
up.
follow-up to the Challenger sale,
Yeah,
Donovan and those guys. Yeah.
that one was great. And then the other one I would throw in there is probably John McMahon's Qualified Sales Leader book.
Hmm.
That one's
It's a new one.
outstanding. So there's three like really solid books in recent years.
Very good. Yeah. I just finished Jeremy Michael's 1.0 of the Jeremy Michael method. Reading sorry, John Jeremy Michael, sorry.
Justin,
Justin
yeah, yeah.
Michael. Yeah, sorry. I'm looking at talking to a Jeremy.
Yes.
But yeah, I think Justin Michael method 1.0, particularly like the later half of the book, just very actionable. So for those that are looking for good reads as well. Last question for you, and I'll let you go. What advice would you give sales consultants out there that are advising B2B sales companies? What's the one, as you know, a lot of our, this is the Sales Consultant Podcast. A lot of our audience are consultants, whether of enablement, tech, general advisory, a lot of different lanes there. But is there one piece of advice you would give companies? You're advising 500
Yeah, yeah.
companies every day in your portfolio. What's that one gem that you would leave us with?
Again, I steal 99.9% of everything. So I'll steal this one from Chris Walker, who we mentioned earlier. And
Yeah.
Chris puts a lot of emphasis on the fact that there's a lot of things that are, he calls them, he'll refer to them, I don't know that he uses this exact language, but basically as vanity metrics, right? So like pipeline is a vanity metric or MQLs is a vanity metric. And the thing that matters is whether you have this activity, this program, this channel, like whatever, has led to closed won business. So I think this may, just like many things, right? Content creators are provocative and they sort of set up dichotomies that may be true or false dichotomies all the time. I think this is an and not necessarily an or, which is like, yes, absolutely nothing matters if it does not translate into closed won revenue, ethically closed won revenue. Um, but sorry, and I should say, sure, like MQLs too. But so the advice is at least playing off of Chris Walker's thing is don't locally optimize, right? Is do the math and make sure that the things that you're recommending actually are, to use a finance term, accretive for the company. So a good example of this is like, I've done a lot of evaluations at our portfolio companies' requests of their sales development programs. And one of them that I did recently, we sliced North America and Europe. So they operate in those two regions. And then we sliced SMB and mid-market. That's where they operate. They don't really do large enterprise stuff. And we did that 2 by 2 and looked at, even if they optimize, like what is the current performance in terms of closed won business, in terms of customer acquisition costs, cost of sale, what have you? Like, where are they at right now? Are they efficient right now? And can we is there a world in which that segment, that in that 2 by 2 grid, could ever be profitable? And there was a segment in there that we came up to the conclusion that, like, from an outbound perspective, that will never be profitable. It just, there's no conceivable world that can happen, given the price point, given the typical response rate, to cold outbound prospecting, blah blah blah. So anyway, that's long-winded advice, but it's trace trace the full funnel and make sure that the advice you're giving is like truly efficient on some objective financial measure that matters to the company and their investors.
Yeah, not just something that echoes a framework or propaganda that you're trying to promote as part of your agency or practices
Oh,
brand.
that's a whole, you got me on a
Yeah.
whole other thing, by the way, which is like, it drives me mad when people try to recoin and make arguments that some things aren't others. Like,
Well, when you
uh,
mentioned about the dichotomies, it's the exact same thing.
yeah,
We're debating semantics for the point of content and engagement when it, yeah.
Bant is perfect. Like,
Hmm.
there are people who rail against Bant because the word is because they want to switch the word or they say it's in the wrong order. Like, come on, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Look, the A for authority in Bant doesn't, you
Does not
know,
change. Yeah.
yeah, and it's that okay, so
Timeline
it's a
does not
buying
change.
community,
Yeah. Mhm.
and timeline, yes, is urgency, and whatever. Like, yeah, I can get on a high horse on this one. So yeah, don't reinvent the wheel with your with like recoin everything. I think that's kind of goofy.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Sales Consultant Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, it would go a long way if you were to write a short review on the listening app of your choice.